Hi, I'm a research partner and I am here to help two tired black parents read Project 2025. We will be in Chapter 1, Section 3.5. Managing personnel in a union environment. Historically, unions were thought to be incompatible with government management. There is a natural limit to the bargaining power of private sector unions, but the financial bottom line of the public sector unions is not similarly constrained. If private sector unions push too hard for a bargain, they can so harm a company or so reduce efficiency that their employer is forced to go out of business and eliminate union jobs altogether. There is no such limit in government, which cannot go out of business, so demands can be excessive without negatively affecting employee and union bottom lines. Even Democratic President Franklin Roosevelt considered union representation in the federal government to be incompatible with democracy. Striking and even threats of bargaining and delay were considered acts against the people and thus improper. It was not until President John Kennedy that union representation in the federal government was recognized, then merely by executive order. Labor bargaining was not set in the statute until the Carter administration was forced by Congress to do so in order to pass the CSRA, although all bargaining was placed under OPM review. The CSRA was able to maintain strong management rights for the OPM and the agencies and forbade collective bargaining on pay and benefits as well as management prerogatives. Over time, OPM, FLRA, and agencies' personnel offices and courts, especially in Democratic administrations, narrowed management rights so that labor bargaining expanded as management rights contracted. But the management rights are still in statute, have been enforced by some administrations, and should be enforced again by any OPM and agency managements, which should not be intimidated by union power. Rather than being daunted, President Trump issued 3 executive orders. Executive Order 13836, encouraging agencies to renegotiate all union collective bargaining agreements to ensure consistency with the law and respect for management rights. Executive Order 13837, encouraging agencies to prevent union representatives from using official time preparing or pursuing grievances or from engaging in other union activity on government time, and Executive Order 13839, encouraging agencies to both limit labor grievances on removals from service or on challenging performance appraisals and to prioritize the performances over seniority when deciding who should be retained following reductions in force. All were revoked by the Biden administration and should be reinstated by the next administration to include the immediate appointment of the FLRA General Counsel and reactivation of the impasses panel. Congress should also consider whether public sector unions are appropriate in the first place. The bipartisan consensus up until the middle of the 20th century held that these unions were not compatible with a constitutional government. After more than half a century of experience with public sector union frustrations of good government management, it is hard to avoid reaching the same conclusion. Fully staffing the ranks of political appointees. The president must rely legally on his top department and agency officials to run the government, and on top of the White House in staff employees to coordinate operations through regular cabinet and other meetings and communications. Without this political leadership, the career civil service becomes empowered to lead the executive branch without democratic legitimacy. While many obstacles stand in his way, a president is constitutionally and statutorily required to fill the top political positions in the executive branch to both assist him and provide overall legitimacy. Most presidents have had some difficulty obtaining congressional approval of their appointees, but this has worsened recently. After the 2016 election, President Trump faced special hostility from the opposing party and the media in getting his appointees confirmed or even considered by the Senate. His early office as a presidential personnel, PPO, did not generally remove political appointees from the previous administration, but instead relied mostly on prior political appointees and career civil servants to run the government. Such reliance on holdovers and bureaucrats led to a lack of agency control and the absolute refusal of the acting attorney general from the Obama administration to obey a direct order from the president. Under the early PPO, the Trump administration appointed fewer political appointees in its first few months in office than had been appointed in any recent presidency, partly because of the historically high partisan congressional obstructions, but also because several officials announced that they preferred fewer political appointees in the agencies as a way to cut federal spending. Whatever the reasoning, this had the effect of permanently hampering the rollout of the new president's agenda. Thus, in those critical early years, much of the government relied on senior careerists and holdover Obama appointees to carry out the sensitive responsibilities that would otherwise belong to the new president's appointees. Fortunately, the later PPO, OPM, and Senate leadership began to cooperate to build a strong team to implement the president's personnel appointment agenda. Any new administration would be wise to learn that it will need a full cadre of sound political appointees from the beginning if it expects to direct this enormous federal bureaucracy. A close relationship between the PPO at the White House and the OPM, coordinating with agency assistant secretaries of administration and PPO's chosen White House liaisons and their staff at each agency, is essential to the management of this large, multi-level, resistant, and bureaucratic challenge. If quote-unquote personnel is policy is to be our general guide, it would make sense to give the president direct supervision of the bureaucracy with the OPM director available in his cabinet. A reformed bureaucracy. Today, the federal government's bureaucracy cannot even meet its own civil service ideals. The merit criteria of ability, knowledge, and skills are no longer the basis for recruitment, selection, or advancement, while pay and benefits for comparable work are substantially above those in the private sector. Retention is not based primarily on performance, and for the most part, inadequate performance is not appraised, corrected, or punished. The authors have made many suggestions here that, if implemented, could bring the bureaucracy under control and enable it to work more efficiently and responsibly, which is especially required for the half of civilian government that administers its undeniable responsibilities for defense and foreign affairs. While a better administered central bureaucracy is crucial for both those and domestic responsibilities, the problem of properly running the government goes beyond simple bureaucratic administration. The specific deficiencies of the federal bureaucracy, size, levels of organization, inefficiency, expense, and lack of responsiveness to political leadership are rooted in the progressive ideology that unelected experts can and should be trusted to promote the general welfare in just about every area of social life. The Constitution, however, reserved a few enumerated powers to the federal government while leaving the great majority of domestic activities to state, local, and private governance. As James Madison explained, the powers reserved to the several states will extend to all objects which, in the ordinary course of affairs, concern the lives, liberties, and properties of the people and the internal order, improvement, and prosperity of the state. Modern progressive politics has simply given the national government more to do than the complex separation of powers Constitution allows. The progressive system has broken down in our time, and the only real solution is for national government to do less, to decentralize and privatize as much as possible, and to ensure that the remaining bureaucracy is managed effectively along the lines of enduring principles and set out in detail here. And that ends chapter 1, section 3, point 5, and the chapter as a whole.
Thank you for listening. This has been Project 2025. And again, I'm helping out the YouTube channel Two Tired Black Parents in their effort to get this out to the world.